In the mid-19th century, London was the heart of a global empire, a sprawling metropolis of progress and power. Its lifeblood was the majestic River Thames, a bustling highway of commerce that connected the city to the world. But beneath the surface of this prosperity, a dark and dirty secret was festering, flowing directly into the city's core. For centuries, the Thames had been London's dumping ground, every drain and sewer emptied directly into its waters. The invention of the flush toilet, meant to improve sanitation, ironically made the problem in the river much, much worse. By the 1850s, the river was not just water, it was an open sewer, choked with the waste of millions. The smell was already a constant, unpleasant feature of London life, a grim reminder of the city's hidden decay. People held their breath crossing bridges, and those living near the banks were accustomed to the foul air seeping through their windows. This simmering crisis was a ticking time bomb, waiting for the right conditions to explode into an unforgettable catastrophe. And in the summer of 1858, those conditions arrived with a vengeance, turning a bad smell into a national emergency. The summer of 1858 began with a relentless, oppressive heatwave that settled over London like a suffocating blanket. Day after day, the sun beat down, and with no rain, the water level of the Thames dropped dramatically. This exposed vast banks of raw, concentrated sewage and industrial effluent that had been hidden beneath the water's surface. The intense heat began to cook these deposits, fermenting years of accumulated filth under the summer sun. A new, horrifyingly potent odor began to rise from the river, far worse than anything London had ever experienced. It was a thick, gagging miasma, a complex bouquet of decay that clung to the back of the throat. The newspapers, with their flair for the dramatic, quickly coined a name for the phenomenon: the Great Stink. The smell was no longer just by the river, it was everywhere. It rolled through streets and alleyways. It seeped through cracks in doors and windows, invading homes from the poorest slums to the wealthiest townhouses. For the citizens of London, there was no escape. The city itself had become a prison of putrefaction. As June turned into July, the Great Stink reached its horrifying peak, becoming a tangible, oppressive force. Londoners tried desperate measures to combat the invisible invader, stuffing their homes with herbs and dousing cloths in vinegar. Those who could afford it fled the city, escaping to the countryside for a breath of fresh, clean air. But for the millions who remained, daily life became a struggle against the senses and a growing sense of dread. The stink was more than just unpleasant. According to the science of the day, it was a harbinger of sickness. This was the era of miasma theory, the belief that diseases were spread by foul-smelling bad air. With the entire city enveloped in the worst smell imaginable, panic began to set in. Was this the beginning of a plague? People reported headaches, dizziness, and fainting spells. The city's health seemed to be failing along with its smell. Cartoons and magazines depicted the Thames as a monstrous skeleton, a grim reaper haunting the city's most famous landmark. The Great Stink was no longer a matter of discomfort. It had become a full-blown public health crisis, demanding action. For those whose livelihoods depended on the Thames, the Great Stink was an inescapable, daily torment. The popular penny-a-ride river steamers, usually packed with commuters, saw their business plummet as people avoided the water. Passengers who dared to take the journey would often become ill, their river crossing turning into a nauseating ordeal. The water itself was described as being opaque, like black soup, with bubbles of gas constantly breaking the surface. It was said that a dropped piece of paper would not sink, but instead rest upon the thick, semi-solid surface. Fishermen found their catches had vanished. No fish could survive in the deoxygenated, poisonous water. Even the river's wildlife fled. The only things that thrived were rats and swarms of flies. The smell was so strong, it was said to tarnish the silver in riverside homes and discolor paintwork. The river, once a symbol of London's glory, was now a source of shame and revulsion, and its foul breath was now creeping towards the very seat of power, situated right on its banks. While the wealthy could flee, the vast majority of London's population, the working class, were trapped. In the sweltering, airless tenements, the Great Stink was a constant, inescapable torment, day and night. Closing the windows against the smell meant suffocating in the heat. Opening them meant inviting the stench inside. Mothers tried to protect their young ones, using scraps of cloth scented with gin or lavender as makeshift masks. Workers toiling in riverside factories and docks had the worst of it, immersed in the odor for their entire shift. The public water pumps, which often drew from contaminated sources, became sites of fear rather than relief. Letters to the editor in newspapers were filled with cries for help from ordinary citizens at their wits' end. They pleaded with the authorities, with the Queen, with anyone who would listen, to do something about the river. Their pleas were mixed with anger. How could the richest city on earth allow its people to live like this? The suffering of the masses was reaching a boiling point, creating immense pressure on the politicians in Westminster. The newly rebuilt Houses of Parliament, a Gothic masterpiece of national pride, had one critical design flaw. Its architects had designed its state-of-the-art ventilation system to draw air directly from the river terrace. In the summer of 1858, this meant the system was pumping the concentrated essence of the great stink into the building. The foul odor invaded the committee rooms, the libraries, and the hallowed chambers of the Commons and Lords. Suddenly, the problem that had plagued the city's poor was now an unavoidable crisis for its most powerful men. They could no longer ignore the issue, debate it from a distance, or dismiss it as a problem for the lower classes. The great stink had breached the corridors of power, holding the nation's government hostage to its foul presence. Initial attempts to solve the problem were comically ineffective, revealing the depth of their desperation. They ordered the curtains to be soaked in chloride of lime, a harsh chemical disinfectant, to mask the smell. But the stench of the river simply mixed with the acrid smell of the chemicals, creating an even more nauseating atmosphere. Inside the House of Commons, the business of empire ground to a halt. No one could concentrate. Members of Parliament, usually so composed, were seen with perfumed handkerchiefs pressed permanently to their noses. The stench was so overpowering that it was difficult to speak, let alone deliver a rousing political speech. Letters and legal documents brought into the building had to be soaked in disinfectant to remove the smell they carried. Chancellor of the Exchequer, Benjamin Disraeli, described the Thames as a Stygian pool reeking with ineffable and unbearable horrors. The lime-soaked curtains, their last hope, were a miserable failure. The building was simply uninhabitable. Some politicians fled the chambers, conducting their business in the hallways furthest from the river. The press had a field day, mocking the government's inability to defeat an enemy as simple as a bad smell. The situation had become a national embarrassment. The world's most powerful legislature was being overpowered by its own filth. A breaking point was imminent. A drastic decision had to be made, and it had to be made quickly. On a particularly foul day in late June, the stench in the committee rooms overlooking the river became completely intolerable. Politicians burst out of the rooms, gasping for air, their faces pale and their eyes watering from the fumes. A motion was put forward to abandon Westminster altogether and reconvene the government in Oxford or St. Albans. The idea of the British government being forced to flee its capital was a humiliating prospect. This was the final straw. The government's hand was forced. Inaction was no longer an option. In a matter of days, spurred by the threat of their own discomfort, Parliament drafted and passed emergency legislation. The Metropolis Local Management Amendment Act was pushed through in a record-breaking 18 days. It gave the go-ahead and, crucially, the funding for a radical and comprehensive solution to London's sewage problem. The Great Stink had achieved what years of reports, warnings, and public outcry could not. It had forced the most powerful people in the country to finally confront the filth they had created. The man tasked with this monumental undertaking was a brilliant civil engineer named Joseph Bazalgette. For years, Bazalgette had been working on a plan, a visionary solution that had been repeatedly rejected as too expensive. But now, with the backing of Parliament, his ambitious designs were finally brought to the forefront. His plan was not to clean the Thames, but to bypass it entirely, a stroke of genius. He would build a new, hidden river beneath the city, a vast network of intercepting sewers. This network would catch all the waste before it reached the Thames and carry it far east of the city. The scale of the project was unprecedented, requiring over 300 million bricks and immense pumping stations. Famously, Bazalgette insisted on doubling the diameter of the pipes, planning for a future city he would never see. He told his critics, "Well, we're only going to do this once, and there's always the unforeseen." This foresight ensured his system would serve London for over 150 years, a testament to his incredible vision. Construction began immediately. An army of navvies descended upon London, tearing up streets to build the new system. They built great embankments along the Thames, like the Victoria Embankment, which housed the main interceptor sewers. Massive, ornate pumping stations were built, beautiful cathedrals of industry designed to lift the sewage to the outfalls. The project was an engineering marvel, a triumph of Victorian ingenuity and sheer brute force over a natural disaster. When the system opened, the effect was immediate. The Thames began to cleanse itself, its dark waters slowly clearing. Within a few years, fish returned to the river for the first time in decades, a clear sign of its recovery. Though miasma theory was wrong, the sewers had an incredible, unintended benefit. They drastically reduced waterborne diseases. Joseph Bazalgette was hailed as a hero, the man who saved London from its own waste. The Great Stink serves as a powerful reminder that sometimes real change only happens when a problem becomes impossible to ignore, and that a crisis, no matter how foul, can inspire solutions that shape a city for centuries to come.